These are the Addams Family Chronicles. Chapter 44, Regrets for a Beautiful Occasion. Christmas Eve of 1930 saw the beginning of a 57-year union between Vernon Reed and Thelma Stiles. This marriage, born in the Great Depression, would endure through 4 wars, prosper through the post-war era, flourish through the space age, and end on a cold January morning in 1988 with the death of its patriarch. The Addams Family survivors would never be the same. This is not the story of what a great man Vernon Reed was, nor is it the story of the devoted woman who was his wife. It is the story of the inexperience and self-indulgence of their third grandson, Eric. Christmas of 1980 was the golden anniversary of this couple. Mom was their only daughter, and because the anniversary was one of significance, she planned a reception in their honor. It was a reception attended by their family and friends, a celebration of 50 happy years together. There were refreshments and pictures, memories and gifts. Everyone seemed to enjoy the festivities, getting reacquainted with each other and reminiscing of simpler times. It would be an occasion fondly remembered by all who attended, all except young Eric. The events of that day are fuzzy. He was hungover. Eric and Keith lived together in Oklahoma City, a 3.5-hour drive from the home of their grandparents. Keith worked at St. Anthony Hospital, while Eric was in his first semester of pharmacy school and working as a technician at Deaconess Hospital. They enjoyed living together and spent a lot of time together playing guitar. Keith had written numerous songs that were enthusiastically received by everyone who heard them. His craft was polished and melodic, and his abilities with the guitar served to inspire young Eric in this endeavor to become a songwriter in his own right. This pursuit, however, left little time for academic excellence, and truancy was the rule with regard to attending his classes. And when he did attend, the notes he took were not notes at all, but rather lyrics to potential songs. And one song in particular seemed to serve as his own personal anthem, called Nobody's Home. I knew a fella in high school a long time ago. Had his feet on the ground and he knew where he wanted to go. His parents had raised him to live by one simple rule: be nobody's fool. Well, he drove off to college with a lot on his questioning mind, leaving one baby sister and a pretty young girlfriend behind. Upon arrival, he's homesick and he calls long distance by phone, but nobody's home. Well, his classes got boring and everything seemed like a drag, except hanging out with the wrong kind of friends that he had. Smoke a joint in the morning, pop a pill in the afternoon. He'd grown up too soon. I saw a fella on the street that I once used to know. Was the same old fella who knew where he wanted to go. Looking wide-eyed and loony, sitting on the sidewalk alone, but nobody's home. Nobody's home. Nobody's nobody's home. Eric was proud of this song and hoped to debut it to his family while visiting his grandparents. The only problem was that he lacked the talent and confidence displayed by his brother, and the thought of offering up his work for criticism struck terror deep into his superego. Eric worried that he would be compared to Keith, and there was no comparison at all. But he resigned himself to performing the song, figuring that there would be alcohol to steady him. How much alcohol was now the question. Eric and Keith arrived at their grandparents' the day before the reception. The fall semester at pharmacy school was over. This would have been a relief to most young, aspiring pharmacists, but to Eric, it only weighed him down with guilt and dread. He hadn't seen his grades yet. He didn't have to. He already knew what they were, and the thought of having to break the news to his mother that he was leaving pharmacy school saturated him with panic. Mom was proud of her son and the choice he had made, and it exerted her pride whenever anyone asked about her children's progress in their academic pursuits. He had already envisioned her reaction 100 times, and each time he thought about it, it made him shudder anew. Alicia, Mom, Bill, and Aunt Madeline were already there. Aunt Madeline, as was the custom, had brought with her a box of day-old donuts from the bakery where she worked. There was always an assortment of pastries, fried pies, and Eric's personal favorite, glazed yeast donuts. Grandmommy already had dinner cooking, however, and the donuts would have to wait until after the meal. They all sat down to dinner, and as soon as the prayer ended, they dug into the meatloaf and mashed potatoes, happy to share their time together. And as soon as the meal was over, they retired to the living room with drinks in hand. This would be a critical mistake for 19-year-old Eric. The first drink went down stiffly, gulp, followed by another, gulp, and then another, gulp. How many followed the first three is anybody's guess. But with each drink, Eric gained more and more confidence. And it wasn't long before Eric was heard to utter, "Hand me that guitar, Granny." And Eric and Keith played their songs deep into the night. Their repertoire was extensive, and much to the chagrin of their audience, they played through their songs, as Eric grew more and more obnoxious with each one. It was the kind of scene played out in a torturous nightmare, praying for the end with no end in sight. And finally, mercifully, the music stopped as Eric passed out on the couch, shamelessly drunk and peacefully quiet in his stupor. The next morning came too early for Eric. The sound of breakfast pans rattling in the kitchen fell on his ears like bass drums booming in a parade. Consciousness came slowly as he gently separated his lids, revealing bloodshot eyeballs, and the piercing light that filtered through the dusty curtains of the bedroom window prompted a painful wince, followed by a reactionary groan. He began to piece together the events from the night before, without much luck, and wondered how he had wound up in bed where he now lay. He had glimpses of guitar playing and merriment, but could only guess at how it was all received. Now the task of facing his family loomed, and the drug-induced amnesia that had befallen him only made the imminent confrontation more uncertain. As he dressed for breakfast and made his way to the breakfast table, he decided a tentative approach was in order. "And how are you feeling this morning?" Bill's rhetorical question was followed by a laugh as he glanced around the table, recruiting feedback on the previous night's proceedings. Mom's embarrassment was evident by her refusal to acknowledge the statement at all, as she passed the scrambled eggs around, offering them first to Eric in the sympathetic sort of way only mothers understand. No one else made mention of it at all, and the conversation shifted to planning the afternoon reception. But the reticence of the elders at that table spoke volumes about their disapproval of the way Eric behaved. To this day, if you ask Eric about that night, he remembers nothing. Alicia made a full cassette tape of the occasion, which is probably stowed away in a box somewhere in an attic, waiting for the day to reemerge and rekindle the horrors of drinking and performing. Eric never even had the nerve to listen to it. He also has trouble looking at pictures taken of his grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary reception, knowing the truth about how he felt that day. But in all of this lies irony. He would tell his mother that he was leaving pharmacy school. He wouldn't tell her that he failed every class that semester. He told her that his interests lay elsewhere, interests that would lead him to enroll in another course of study, music. But that's another song altogether.
Get your motor running, head out on the highway.
Chapter 45, Born to be Wild. Growing up in the Adams household meant certain rules and principles were always in play, regardless of circumstance. Bedtimes were always enforced, snacking was always prohibited, meals were always served at the dinner table, and Sunday church service attendance was compulsory. Oh, and one more, no motorcycles. Why Mom had the motorcycle rule is anybody's guess. Each of the boys had friends who had them. Mike Bays, Mickey Miller, Hal Stout all had motorcycles. But each of the boys knew better than to even breach the subject of owning one. They knew what the answer would be. But young Eric, known to test Mom's rules on frequent occasions, fancied the idea of the thrill and independence of owning one. And as he grew old enough to drive, it was inevitable the issue would surface between them. "Mom, I want a motorcycle." A hush fell over the dinner table as Alicia looked up from her plate, shocked at the statement that had just been rendered. She almost laughed aloud, thinking that Eric must be stupid for even saying such a thing. Mom, however, took a more pragmatic approach to the situation, opting to educate on the reasons against motorcycles rather than a flat denial of his request. Motorcycles offer no protection in a wreck. I read every day about people getting killed on them. Other drivers have trouble seeing motorcycles, and even if you're careful, you might still be in an accident. And if you are lucky and not killed, you could be paralyzed for the rest of your life. Nothing good comes from driving a motorcycle. Mom was unwavering in her resolve. "But Mom, I know people who have motorcycles. They wear helmets and never have accidents. You wouldn't have to take me places. I wouldn't have to borrow the car anymore. I could just drive myself on my motorcycle. I would be very careful." Eric viewed this logic as impeccable and awaited Mom's rebuttal, expecting the debate to continue. But then, inexplicably, concession followed, as Mom sought to end the debate without incident. "Okay, you can have a motorcycle if you save enough money to get one." Mom uttered these words with full knowledge of Eric's financial track record. She knew well that motorcycles were costly, and that Eric would never muster the funds necessary for such a big purchase. It was a bold gamble on Mom's part, one that would have offered long-shot odds in Vegas. She must have felt comfortable with those odds to have suggested it, but she had no concept of the seed she had planted that day by tacitly endorsing such an endeavor. Not long after that discussion, Mom bought Eric his first car, a 1969 Pontiac Catalina, for $495 from a car dealer in Ada, Oklahoma. The odometer displayed 104,308 miles, the tires were bald, and there was a big rip in the front seat. But to a senior in high school, it was like winning the lottery. There was hardly a memory of the motorcycle dispute now that Eric had a way to get around town. Perhaps that was part of Mom's master plan, an insurance policy against the long-shot possibility that Eric might somehow raise enough money to purchase one. Or maybe Mom thought that it was better to spend $495 on a car than to spend 10 times that on a hospital bill. Whatever the reason, Eric was happy with Mom's generosity, and Mom was happy for her child's safety. Several years passed, years that included recession, double-digit interest rates, skyrocketing inflation, and another oil embargo. It was 1982. Bank failures, high unemployment, and high gas prices were the rule. Eric had a job, however, working as a pharmacy technician at a rate of $4.25 an hour. Working 30 hours a week, he scarcely had enough money to pay his rent, let alone buy gas at over $1 a gallon for a car that barely got 13 miles to the gallon. This calculated out to almost a week's worth of wages just on gas each month. Something had to give. And then, one day, while he was filling up at a gas station, a young man on a motorcycle pulled into the next bay and killed the motor before taking off his helmet. He was a nice-looking fellow, with shoulder-length hair, wearing an Ocean Pacific t-shirt. The gap between his light-colored beach pants and his deck shoes exposed suntan ankles that suggested a lifestyle of leisure. As he reached for the handle on the gas pump, Eric felt obliged to small talk. "Whoa, now that looks like a fast machine." Eric was admiring the blue metallic shine from the body of the motorcycle. "Yeah, and at 65 miles per gallon, it's hard to beat." Alarm bells went off in Eric's mind. He had to be kidding. He thought for a moment, absorbing the implications of gas mileage of that magnitude. 65 miles per gallon? Are you shitting me? The next question was only logical. How much would one of those cost? The answer only served to amaze him further. "I bought it brand new down there at Maxie's for $1,500. Can't beat that. And the chicks love it." He winked and smiled as he finished fueling the motorcycle and replaced his helmet, hopping back on his bike while Eric watched the counters on his side of the pump continue rolling like a slot machine. When the pump finally clicked off, it read $22.10. And as he capped the gas tank, he peeked around at the other side of the pump to satisfy his curiosity. It read $4. The decision to buy had just been made. The very next day, Eric went to Maxie's Motorcycles. There, on the showroom floor, was a maroon 1982 Honda 450, selling for $1,450. They offered easy terms of $40 per month over 4 years. The gas savings alone would pay for it. The fact that he didn't even know how to drive it offered no obstacle, as he took his friend Jim Nichols with him to drive it home. And over the next couple of weeks, he became proficient at riding it. He was proud of his motorcycle. He enjoyed the looks and comments he received from those that noticed. And in the back of his mind, he remembered the conversation he had had with his mother. Whether he was seeking redemption for the perceived dismissal by Mom of his ability to save enough money to buy a motorcycle, or that he was just excited to show it off, he decided to drive it over 100 miles, down to Ardmore to visit his mom. As it turned out, he was lucky to have arrived at all. On the way down, he had to traverse the Arbuckle Mountains, an ancient and beautiful mountain range 20 miles north of Ardmore. He marveled at the view of the town from the summit as he began his descent into the plains that surrounded him. As the motorcycle picked up speed, he wondered just how fast it would go. Now seemed to be the perfect opportunity to test it. The needle on the speedometer passed 60, then 65, then 70. Eric leaned forward and shrunk down to lessen the wind resistance, which seemed to give more life to the racing engine. 75, now 80. There still seemed to be a lot left. But as the needle passed 85, something happened that might have changed his life forever. In the midst of this adrenaline-filled speed rush, a vibration in the handlebars became perceptible. Slight at first, it began to magnify quickly. so quickly that Eric barely had time to back off the throttle in time to regain control. Shaken, he continued on his journey, obeying the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit the rest of the way. It would be solely in retrospect that he would realize the significant danger posed that day by his recklessness. He pulled into the driveway at 1901 Harmony Lane and killed the motor. He took off his helmet and hooked it on the mirror that was anchored on the front handlebars before striding toward the garage door. He was anxious to show it off, curious about his mother's reaction, and wondering if her attitude toward motorcycles had softened since that discussion 5 years earlier. After greeting Mom and Bill, the moment of discovery was at hand. They walked out into the driveway, sensing Eric's excitement. A moment of silence lingered before Bill began to speak. "That's a whale of a machine, Eric." He walked around the cycle, admiring it as he went. He truly seemed enamored, remembering back to a time when he had owned a 3-wheel motorcycle, one that he drove yearly in the various Shriners parades. Eric glanced towards his mother, trying to read the blank, stoic expression on her face that she had purposely assembled to belie her true feelings in the matter. As her mind raced to find something positive to contribute, she leaned forward and pointed at the decal on the gas tank. "Honda." She could at least relate to that. She owned a 1978 Honda CVCC hatchback. She didn't say much more, but mentioned that dinner was on the stove and asked if they were hungry. They walked into the house together, taking with them unspoken words of fear and resentment. After small talk at dinner, the three of them retired to the back porch with drinks in hand. Though it was customary to have a couple of nightly drinks, the events of this day mandated a stiff one at the outset. And as the alcohol crept over them, the subject of the motorcycle was revived. Eric extolled the virtues of motorcycle ownership. "The best thing about it is that it gets over 60 miles per gallon," Eric began. "I drive it to work at the hospital. It's a lot of fun. I'm saving a lot of money." Mom nodded, but after having some time to absorb the news, she was now ready to speak her piece. "But do you realize how dangerous they are? I read every day about young people being killed or maimed." Eric rolled his eyes and started to interrupt, but Mom continued. "Eric, you just don't have the experience to know what can happen. I don't want something bad to happen to you." Her voice broke there, and unashamedly, she began to cry. It was a long cry, and Bill nodded his head as his eyes met Eric's. Not a word was spoken. The twilight of the still summer evening fell around them as they absorbed the moment. Eric would own that motorcycle for another 4 years. And those 4 years were not without incident, as he would incur 2 different accidents on that bike, though neither was serious. He would sell it for $500 in 1986 to another young man whose mother probably reacted the same way. In retrospect, who was right or wrong on this issue is immaterial. Eric's life was his to live. But his mother never stopped caring how he lived it. And that has made all the difference.
Get your motor running. Head out on the highway. Looking for adventure in whatever comes our